We haven't seen a whole lot from Namco lately. In 1989, Namco published 17 games on the Famicom. In 1990, they published 4. A lot of those 1989 games were pushed out the door as Namco's original license to publish Famicom games was running out. And since Namco was very frosty toward Nintendo, they heavily restricted their Famicom publishing after that. Which makes a second Wagyan land kind of remarkable. The little dinosaur with a big mouth now stands beside Famista, as Namco's big series on the Famicom. And as you'd expect for a sequel, this does everything bigger and better. The plot of this game is that the giant tree at the heart of Wagyan land seems to be dying, and Wagyan 2, son of the original Wagyan, sets out to find something to help it. Wagyan Land 2 is a platformer, so the A button jumps, while the B button causes Wagyan to shout. But the shout doesn't defeat enemies, it just stuns them for a few moments. You can step on stunned enemies to reach higher places though. The shout starts out fairly puny, barely stunning enemies for a second, but Wagyan can pick up Wagyanizers, which were the real-life toy that Namco made that the video game series came out of. Every time Wagyan collects one of these, his shot gets bigger, eventually it can penetrate enemies, and if he collects 4 of them, he becomes invincible and can destroy enemies by running into them. When that invincibility runs out, however, it's back to square one. The shout can also be used to find hidden items on stages. There will be a little swirl that appears when you hit them, and within these you could find extra lives, a bonus stage where you're invulnerable and have to take out a bunch of enemies, or possibly warps to take you to whole new regions of the map. A new addition in Wagyan Land 2 are these exclamation point bricks. Shouting at one of these will reveal a power-up. It's possible it could just be a regular Wagyanizer, but you could also find a Super Wagyanizer that allows you to charge up your voice and then destroy enemies with it. There's also an invisibility potion that will prevent you from taking damage from enemies, but you don't defeat them when you run into them. That one wears off after a short time. Finally, there's a new version of the Wagyan Copter where you can mash the A button while you're in the air to slow your descent. You can only have one of these items at a time, and collecting a new one will cause you to lose whichever one you had. As in the first game, there's multiple paths through Wagyan Land 2. Sometimes it's as easy as which way you go at the exit, and sometimes it involves doing something special. The extra special feature of the original Wagyan Land was that rather than have boss battles, you engaged in shiritori with enemies. These battles have returned for Wagyan Land 2, but they also have some new minigames for boss battles. Shiritori is a Japanese word game that's rather difficult to replicate in English due to how we spell things. The idea is one player supplies a word, and then the next player provides a word whose first syllable is the last syllable of the previous word. For example, if you were given the word niku, or meat, then you could reply kumo, or spider. In the Wagyan Land series, this is done by providing tiles with pictures on them, and there's a few synonyms for each tile, so there's always additional options. For this game, you either have to come up with enough word chains, or give a word where the computer can't pick out one of the tiles to make the next word in the chain. There are 3 new minigames that you could play against bosses. One of these requires that you find a number on a big panel. The first time you encounter it, for example, it just counts up 1 to 40, and you just have to spot the next tile before the computer. The other 2 games are variations on memory. You have a lot of upside down tiles, and for one of these you're doing the usual flip 2 over and look for pairs, although every board here has a pattern to it, so if you can identify that pattern, then you'll win. The other version is rock, paper, scissors, except you don't know what you're going to throw until you turn over a tile. Ties cause the tiles to flip back over, so you can keep track of which those are. Losing to a boss means you lose a life and have to replay the level from the beginning. But there's even more actions Wagyan can take in this game. At one point you can have an eggshell drop on your head, and then you can headbutt enemies to death. This lasts until you die, and just like in the previous Wagyan Land, it only takes 1 hit to defeat you. If you do get a game over, then rather than a continue, you have a stage select, and that lets you pick out any stage up to the point that you're currently at, including the ones on the paths you didn't take. Once you're past the first world in Wagyan Land 2, most of the stages have some sort of gimmick to them. Like this cave, for example, that absorbs sound so your shots don't go as far and weaken as they go. Or this stage where a volcano erupts every few seconds, shaking everything. Yeah, a lot of the stages are based on things you've seen before, like the ice levels. But Wagyan Land 2 is a game that keeps changing things up on you. As you might expect, there will be a Famicom follow-up, but not until there's been a Super Famicom game. The next game in the series is Super Wagyan Land, and it will be Namco's entrance to the Super Famicom. Naturally, Wagyan Land 2 is a really well-regarded game in Japan. I didn't see anybody calling it out as their favorite of the series, but everyone seemed to be disappointed that some of the mini-games don't make it out of this game. As for myself, well, Wagyan Land was good. Wagyan Land 2 is better. I'd even say it's way more accessible than the first game was. And even though everything looks cartoony and bright, it can be pretty challenging. Since Wagyan can't defeat enemies, if you're depowered, you might have a hard time squeezing through some areas. I have to say, Wagyan Land 2 isn't my favorite of the series either, but it is an exceptional game.